There's a saying that art is never really done. You just stop working on it. And that's where I am with this project. There's any number of ways that this body could be different or things I could try to do, but it's not really clear that any of them will be better. And so I've finished sanded this to 240 on all sides, top and back. I've used a tack cloth to get all the dust off, and now it's time to do the finish. And so what I'm going to try and do is one of those really obnoxious, high contrast finishes. So the first thing I'm going to do is use the black dye from Keda. They come in powder packets, so a 1/4 teaspoon to 4 ounces of water. And what I'm going to do is I'm only staining the top. Everything else is going to be natural. And so I want to be really careful not to make a huge mess, but at the same time I want to make sure that this first coat is really, really black. Once I do that, then I'm going to let this dry overnight. I'll sand the top again to lighten the top a bit, and then I'm going to go over it with brown and potentially yellow to try and do kind of a tiger eye burst. Here we go. I'm using a piece of an old white t-shirt to put the dye on. I've used different things from paper towels, shop towels, and so on, but it turns out that I feel like I get the best control using an old cotton t-shirt. It also seems not to put too much fuzz anywhere. And so what I'll do is I'll apply the dye to the rag here. I will gently go over this, be very careful not to drip anywhere, and then I will let this dry overnight. The black goes on a little purplish. I'm going to do 2, maybe even 3 coats to really try and get the black to come through. In some ways it doesn't matter because I'm going to be sanding most of this off anyway. And what does get down into the flame will end up looking pretty dark. By swiping from the inside over to the edge, you make sure that you don't pull the rag back and actually hit the side in the other direction. And this is really to help keep you from getting any dye on the sides that you don't want to stain. You'd be tempted to think that you could actually mask off the sides just to be sure that you don't make any mistakes, but it doesn't really work. Masking off is fine for the sort of side mistakes, but what ends up happening is if you spill any down the side, it's going to run behind the tape. And so in some ways it's easier to just not do it at all and just try and be really careful. Obviously I have a pretty small surface area here, and so just take my time. There's certainly no rush, and I make a beautiful top. It already looks pretty amazing with just this black, and this is going to be almost completely sanded off to just leave the black in the grain. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this turns out. You can already see down in this area it's starting to dry in a little bit, and so I'm going to go over this again and make sure it's really good and soaked with black, and then we'll let it dry overnight and see if it needs any more application. A friend convinced me that this might actually be a better looking guitar just as some sort of black dark navy blue burst, and so I am going to sand this back because I didn't sand fine enough to just leave it this way. So it'll be interesting to see how this turns out when I sand it back. I think I'm going to use probably something like 320 grit sandpaper to sand it back, and then we'll see what it looks like. This might be a zebra guitar or some sort of blue black burst. After the 320 grit sanding, you can see it's lightened up quite considerably. It's also very, very smooth. And so what I'm going to do right now, I've already hit this with a tack cloth to get all the dust off that I can, but I'm going to wipe it down with mineral spirits just to make sure that I can get any dust that might still be in the pores. Some people use naphtha. I use mineral spirits. It's my understanding that mineral spirits is just a weaker form or chemically similar to naphtha, just a little bit more gentle, takes a little longer to dry. And so I'll wipe this down with mineral spirits, I'll let this dry, and then I'm going to come back with the same color black again. But the thing to understand here is because I've gone up in grit, I did the original one at 220, and I've since stained it up at 320, is that the stain isn't going to penetrate as deeply. And so this time, we're going to have all of these dark areas from the curly end grain that are already dark. It'll get slightly darker, bluish, grayish, but hopefully we'll have a lot more contrast. So it's an interesting sort of tannish, bluish coloring right now. If I were to put Tru-Oil or potentially even spray this with lacquer right now, this is what the finish might look like. But I'm definitely going to go darker on this one. And so I'll wait till this dries. I'll put on that second coat of black, and then we'll see where we are. I've let the mineral spirits evaporate off for about an hour now. It looks pretty good. And so now I'll put my second coat of black on, and we should really start to see the figure pop. You can see it's already starting to dry over here, and so I'm going to go back and do a third coat or a second coat, today, and really make sure it gets good and set in. But even with the drying, it appears we're getting much more of a grayish base with the darker tiger striping, and so I think this is really going to turn out great. We'll see how it dries to see if there's anything else that's going to be done to it. The second application of the dye is now dry, and you can definitely see a lot more of the contrast in the grain patterns. You also get the effect where when you move the grain around in the different lights, you're getting a different reflection in each direction. And so this is definitely looking better than the first coat. What I think I'm going to do is there's a PRS finish called Frostbite where it's lighter on the bottom half of the guitar, and then it actually fades towards being darker. And so I think I can do that with just sandpaper, and I'll take this and probably use something like 400 or 600 grit sandpaper, try and make it lighter on this edge, very, very lightly sand the top, and hopefully when I'm done, there won't be a need for any more dye. So I just got done hitting this with a 320 in the orbital sander, and you can see I've started to create a triangle starting from the neck pickup downwards. I'm going to even this out a little bit more. You can see on the left side, it's not quite equal just because the guitar itself is offset. So what I can do here is just try and clean that up a little bit more, and then I'm going to go over the whole thing with 600 grit, and that's going to give a little bit lighter top towards the neck pocket, smooth everything out so it doesn't look like one section was sanded but the rest of it wasn't. I didn't want to hit it too hard with the 600 grit, but it definitely smoothed it out and lightened up the areas around the neck pocket and on the sides. And so now what I can do is first go dust this off, see what it looks like, and then possibly refine with a little bit of sandpaper in hand the areas to make sure that it's not a hard line. But I think we're very, very close here. And it'd be really interesting to see when I clean this off with mineral spirits to see what this might look like when it has clear finish on it. Don't even have a lot of good words for this right now. I'm just going to go ahead and take a still picture of this and just kind of stare at it for a little while. But this, to me, I'm really super duper happy with. I love how it's darker towards the neck, lighter towards the end of the guitar, and this might be my finish. After sitting with this for a little bit, I think I want to go a little bit darker. The mineral spirits highlighted that with a clear finish on this might actually have a lot more brown than I was looking for. So I'm going to take my black that I used before, I'm going to put it into a cup, and then I'm going to keep adding water to it till I get a much lighter kind of grayish. And then I'm going to apply it here. You know, I've also sanded to 800 grit at this point, so I'm not sure it's going to take too much more stain. But if I can get a lighter shade of black, grayish, bluish here, I think it'll take out some of the brown and get me a much more streamlined color. And so I'm getting pretty close to where I need to leave it alone before I mess things up. But I'm going to take one more shot with this. Probably said it a couple times already, but I think this is just about as much as we can do. Eventually, you try and pack so much dye in that it really actually mutes the colors, so you don't want to spend too much time or too much effort trying to put, you know, layer after layer after layer. Eventually, it won't take any more stain, and it'll stop looking so good. And so the next step is to go through and actually scrape off the binding everywhere a little bit of the black dye got onto the binding. And what I'm going to do is just use a little bit of blue tape to mark off some of the area on a razor blade so that I don't have to worry about scratching up the actual body too much. This will also hopefully avoid cutting myself, which, you know, is always something you want to try and avoid. So, you know, I can set up the blade sort of like this, wrapping it with tape, and then, you know, go along the body. Of course, this is going to take a while, so I'm going to time lapse this. But after I'm done that, I should be ready to start putting either a Tru-Oil finish, a lacquer finish, or, you know, possibly even both. With the top binding cleaned up now, I can just go around the top here and just make sure that any dye that might have, you know, creeped over the edge is cleaned off as well. Another thing that I like to do is actually hold the razor blade at, you know, maybe a 45-degree angle, maybe even slightly shallower than that, and run it along the binding. You know, along with the sanding that happens and some of the scraping here, this edge can actually get very sharp. And so by running the blade, you know, against this hard edge here, it works as a chamfer of sorts. and just sort of smooths it out a little bit without spending a ton of time with sandpaper and things like that. Obviously, you don't want to take away too much, but again, anything that you can do to sort of smooth out the binding works really well. So I'll clean up the top binding here, and then the last step will be to put a coat of Tru-Oil on. And there you go. I put a little bit of Tru-Oil on here. I wiped it till it's essentially dry. The film is obviously going to start building up in the pores of the wood, but it's certainly not on thick enough to really make a material difference in the actual finish of the guitar. And so that's it. I'm going to let this dry overnight, and then in the morning I'll take a look at it, see if it needs any more coats. But otherwise, that's the general, at least color finish of the guitar. The lacquer finish will come when it's a little bit warmer outside.